The war had ended 1,000 years ago, yet somehow humanity still carried its scars among the stars. They wore them quietly, in the way a pilot's hands hovered over a console before a jump, in the old lullabies that counted down reactor harmonics, in the way their ships were patched instead of replaced, stitched with generations of care. The galaxy called them latecomers, young, redundant, fragile. But time has a way of folding on itself, and even the young carry ages within. The ancient gate hung above the ash-gray planet like a frozen thought, an unclosed eyelid of stone and machine, pierced by spokes of crystal mechanisms, wrapped in whispering ribbons of magnetic dust. No thruster fire disturbed it. No beacon blinked from its facets. It simply existed, older than the empire of hands, older than the silent accord that followed, older than the ocean lattices of the Kalinar and the salt-breath towers of the HFY, older perhaps than stars the galaxy no longer remembered by name. It had one behavior only, refusal. Across 10 centuries, every species with curiosity and a pulse had come to the gate and stepped into its aperture. They walked with supplication, they walked with violence. They sent saints and thieves and machines in swarms. Each time the gate remained gray and cold, its inner halo, thick as mountains, never lit. Its relic sensors hummed without response. Pilgrims came away with silence in their ears and a hollow where wonder had been. On the day humanity came, the sky was the color of turned steel, and dust swam the low orbit like old breath. The envoy shipwreck arrived alone, its hull like a book spine that had been thumbed 1,000 times. Named for a rook on a chessboard, clever and patient and reliable, it was not beautiful by the standards of the fungi-carved fleets or the living resins of the HFY. But it was steady, and it had known hard travels and come home from each. Captain Mara Hale stood by the forward observation pane, a black ribbon of hair caught on her cheek, her palm on the cold glass. The gate filled the pane, great as a horizon. She watched the spokes of it, the little fractures that ran like rivers where ancient stress had cut it, the slow eddies of dust along the inner arch. The ship's hum sank into her bones the way a harbor's foghorn used to in the old coastal cities. No markers, her navigator said quietly behind her, a young man named Terran with ghost-like tattoos along his wrist. No thermal bleed, nothing, it's quiet. Like a cathedral after a funeral, Mara murmured. They had permission to attempt entry. The treaty gave every member 3 tries across a century. The others had laughed when humanity petitioned. Newborns, a HFY diplomat had murmured, voice like rain on glass. Let them have their turn at the silent stone. And the Kalinar, dry and vast, had rustled their membranes in amusement. The gate refuses all, let the apes learn. Humanity had learned to let laughter slide off. There were heavier weights to carry. They dropped anchor thrusters and drifted closer. The gate's aperture loomed. It was not a simple circle. Its interior was layered, rings upon rings, each inscribed with swirls that were not language but something more foundational, like the hush before speech. At the center, nothing. Not darkness, the specific nothing of a place waiting to become real. Transmit our approach, Mara said. Terran's fingers danced. Old earth music, strings, and a low drum ran briefly through the bridge from some crew channel. Someone cut it. The ambient hum remained, the sound of a ship holding its breath. The first emissary to step forward was not human. Accords required cross-species courtesy, where one would show for the others. The HFY had drawn the act by lots and sent a scribe tall, translucent, with eyelids that closed vertically and edges that shimmered as if always wet. The scribe's name translated to a curve of river silt. It waited in the air with dignity, centuries of memory flowing in thin laces along its skin. When it reached the threshold, its voice came in clear liquid syntax through the ship's translator. "We come," said the scribe, with peace and question. Nothing happened. The gate's inner ring held its breath, and the dust kept its slow drift, and the echoes of 1,000 years resettled. The scribe stood with patient sadness. It had assumed this. It bowed and receded, droplets beating along its trailing edge. Next came a Kalinar envoy. They were huge, layered like sandstone and draped with thin banners of mathematics. Their footfalls were patient, grating a little. They spoke equations. They recited the names of stars they had cut paths through. They sang a proof. Nothing happened. A small fossil of disappointment broke off their shoulder and clinked to the deck. A procession followed, a four-armed Her chieftain carrying a child's drawing of the gate done in bright oils. An AI rake swarm condensed into a single-faceted body humming the latencies of 1,000 minds. A choral-born technic from the archer choir, 1,000 tiny mouths whispering one word, open, until it shredded itself to silence. It went on, not even a flicker of response. Reality often declines dramatic timing. When Mara stepped toward the gate, it wasn't with ceremony. It was because the time for ceremony had passed, and because she was tired of watching others hope and falter. She was tired of the years behind her like knives in a drawer. She was tired, full stop, and humans sometimes do their most astonishing work not from strength, but from weariness that refuses to lay down. She paused at the threshold out of respect. There had never been a human this close to the gate's heart. The inner stone was not like stone at all. At this proximity, the texture was less thing than thought. A pattern that wasn't quite random and wasn't quite regular. Something like the rhythms of a heart you could not hear but felt somewhere behind your breastbone when you were a child and afraid in a storm. Mara lifted her hand. She did not touch. She stood with her palm hovering in the thin air between, and the air seemed to hum, the way a room hums when someone is about to speak a truth they have withheld too long. Her hand stayed there, open and refusing to tremble. The gate lit. It was not a bloom of light so much as a decision. A single white thread traced itself along the nearest inner ring, a gesture like a needle tugging through fabric. Then another thread. Then 20. The whole aperture stitched itself with a luminous weave. Dust eddies froze, then spiraled as if caught by a tide. In the bridge, breath left lungs, instruments chirped and squealed and then steadied as if relieved of a burden. The Rook's hull cameras flared, compensated, found clarity. On the observation pane, the gate's heart opened like morning. It began with a sound, a low tone old as whale song tuned to something bones remembered. Terran's hand rose to his mouth. On the diplomatic channel, voices overlapped with wonder. For the human, breathed the HFY scribe, every edge of it shining with dew. Mara did not move. She thought of her grandmother, dead by the time Mara was 5. The old woman's palms had been maps of work, calloused and kind. When doors don't open, her grandmother had said once as rain ran down a drought window, we make something of the stoop. Sit, girl, learn patience. The door is not the point. The leaning is the point. Mara felt that now, strange and reversed. The patient leaning that had lasted 10 centuries now answered in one human's outstretched hand. But a door was a door, and beyond it the unknown. Captain, Terran whispered as if a loud word might embarrass the moment. Orders. Mara lowered her hand, kept it open at her side, and stepped into the light. At first there was only brightness and the sensation of an immense, slow turning as of a planet you did not know rotating you around it. Then there was texture, then sound, not the sound of the ship, not the sound of any machine. Wind. She stood on a plane of glass, except it wasn't glass. It was a field of plates thin as soap film, each one shimmering with color, each one responding to her proximity with a gentle tremor. Beneath the plates something vast moved. Above her a sky arced, a sky inside the gate, a sky made of folds of metallic silk. The horizon bent wrong, but in a way that made you want to walk toward it anyway. Recording, she asked. The ship's implants blinked in her eye. Broadcast. Her voice carried back through the gate to the Rook, to 100 relay ships lingering in cautious orbit, to translation nodes that would feed thousands of worlds in the months to come. But no one intruded on her feed. No analysts chattered in her ear. Only the quiet and the wind and her breath, and the faint crackle of the plates finding and releasing tension beneath her boots. She walked. The plates sang when she stepped. The sound was small and clear like water tapping a glass. The pattern of the plates altered as if they were negotiating sweetly among themselves about how best to receive her weight. She would have laughed if her chest hadn't ached. Humanity had always been at home on surfaces that argued, ship's decks, mountain scree, the brittle edges of orbital farms. We make do, her mother had said once, tightening a seal on a market stall in a district that had lost pressurization twice in one winter. We dance where it hurts. A structure rose on the plain. It wasn't a building in the human sense. It was a rise of darker plates, like plates that had learned to hold themselves together at a different pitch. They formed not walls but invitations, stairs without risers, a kind of threshold inside the threshold. There was a sense, like the feeling when a storm turns and hits the window face on, that something had noticed her. Mara set her boot on the first stair. The wind deepened, or no, the wind was a voice. It was a voice made of many voices, the way a crowd's murmur is the sum of 1,000 small breaths. There were no words, there were timbres, curious, eager, frightened, old, then younger than anything had the right to be. She knew, in the way we know during dreams and sometimes at the instant of waking, that the gate had been made not as a weapon or a fortress, but as a companion. The gate had been built by something or many somethings a long time ago, and it had been left by a road, and it had been waiting. It had refused all not because it was unkind, but because the ones who had built it had taught it to know the things that would use it without understanding the cost. And then they had left. And then wars had passed. The gate had listened to footsteps, to voices, to the intentions that hang behind the shape of a breath, and it had declined. Mara's hand found the rail flowed to meet her hand like a cat that wanted to be touched. She laughed then, sound echoing like a bell. The ache in her chest eased just a little. "You waited," she said. The wind voice answered with a tone like a hand placed gently on the back of a tired neck. Outside, on the rook and the waiting vessels, no one breathed. It is a rare thing to witness a myth become briefly practical. The inner threshold opened further. The plates peeled. The sky lowered, luminous, folding itself into an arch that was less sky and more memory. Images traced themselves on the silk fold, not images, impressions, a handprint in wet brick, a loom beside a hearth, a curve of starlight in the kind of dark only deep space knows, a child with grease on her cheeks, grinning with a bolt in her teeth, a battlefield that continued for the length of a lifetime and the length of a single step. The archive of a species the gate had known and loved, there and gone. It was showing her its past not as data but as touch. The gate asked, not with words, with the open palm of what are you, not in the sense of species or flags or histories you would put on an embassy wall. The deeper what are you. Mara did not speak. Humans are famous for their words, for how we pour them into any quiet space until it is warm. But some questions deserve answers made of spine and teeth and breath. She took off her glove. The air was cool and clean and tasted like nothing she had words for. She pressed her bare palm to the rail. This is what she showed the gate. A child holding a bent spoon she had straightened with stubborn hands. A bridge across a blown river made of sheet metal and prayer. The time she drove a harvest rover across a frozen ocean with a friend singing in the other seat. And when the ice groaned under them, they didn't stop. Her grandmother's laugh. A schoolroom where the walls were patched and uneven and the teacher drew a star cluster in chalk with love. A hospital corridor where hope was a cot dragged into a sunbeam. A crowded ship's mess where someone had baked bread, and the whole room smelled like home. The moment she said yes to a job that would take her from the rust-red soil she loved, and she went anyway. The moment she told a dying soldier, "I'll carry your story." She showed the gate not triumphs but stitches. the things that hold when glory falls through. The rail warmed under her hand. "Captain," Taryn whispered thickly on the link as if he had been crying without knowing it. "The everything is spiking, but it's stable. It's so stable, Captain." "Stay with me," Mara said, and she did not know if she was speaking to Taryn, to the gate, or to her own breath. Something jarred then, not in the gate, in the space outside it, a flare, a streak. The monitors on the Rook chirped in a new tone, alarm-edged. One of the watching fleet's Kalinar had shifted position abruptly as if to leave orbit, but they were not leaving. Their banners of mathematics were unfurling, they were aiming them. "Captain," Taryn said, and there was fear now. "Kalinar warforms are cycling up. They think we're taking it. They're afraid," Mara said. She remembered a boy named Gyro when she was 12 who punched a hydrant because he had failed a test, and it was the only thing that wouldn't hit him back. Fear is a childish god and an old one. The gate's wind voice tightened, a small dropped note of warning. Mara turned, hands still on the rail, and faced the aperture. Through it, the Rook's pane glowed like a far window at night. She had to speak, and she knew that the words would be gathered up and translated 1,000 times into 1,000 syntaxes and be inadequate each time. She spoke anyway. "We are not here to own," she said. "We are here to listen." The wind warmed, the plates calmed, but the moment was broken. Outside, fear had found teeth. They came quick, the bright spear lines of weapons that sang as they went. They were not aimed at the gate itself. No one dared that, but at the vessels nearest the aperture, including the Rook. Calculations spun in the Kalinar's banners. If the human died within, perhaps the gate would close, all would return to stasis. It was an old dream. If we can unchange what frightens us, perhaps we do not have to grow. Scarcely had the spears lanced as a different light ripped space sideways. A Herd dreadnought, the one with the chieftain who had carried the child's painting, had placed itself between the spear lines and the Rook. The spears struck its belly, peeling it like fruit. Its hull sang as it died. On the universal channel, a low voice said, "Stand down, this is a birth." The Kalinar paused, only a pause, but time hides in pauses. The Rook lifted a shield of brilliance and held, and other ships, Kashai wetships, Archer choir corals, moved into a lattice of protection. The gate's aperture glowed. Its inner tone rose, not in anger, but in insistence. It demanded attention like a song demands a body to move. Mara let go of the rail only to place her hand on the plate of the threshold. She went further in. A room unfolded. It was small after all the sky. It held a table and 2 chairs and a window. The window looked out onto nothing she recognized and everything she knew. A city street at dawn with deliveries being made and someone's ant-sweeping stoop. A trench line with water at the bottom, but in the water a star's reflection. A clean deck and a dirty hand realigning a bolt. A lighthouse. The inside of a mouth about to laugh. Human places and terrible places, and the spaces between where hope goes to smoke a cigarette in the cold and gather its lungs to go back inside. She sat. The other chair waited. She understood. The gate had let her bring humanity's truth to it. Now it would bring its to humanity, not all at once. That would break her, a conversation, an exchange of wounds and bombs and ideas that behave like seeds. "What did they use you for?" she asked softly without demand. The window rippled. The table changed under her hand, not material but temperature. Warm, then cooler, warm again. The pattern of a sun growing and stepping down. A long-ago species had built the gate to cross between, not distances only, states. Places where physics draped the loom differently. The gate found sympathetic resonance. It learned the music of a home and tuned a place to hear it. It allowed travelers to carry a way of being like a candle and have it not go out in strange wind. But the long-ago ones had used it too hard, or maybe those who came next had. Weapons had rattled against it. Demands had been laid on it that had not asked it what it wanted. Few had asked. Fewer had listened. It had closed itself with painful patience. It had chosen to refuse rather than harm, not in rage, in grief. You chose non-violence, Mara said, and her voice was hoarse. You held refusal as a sentry. The tone agreed, rippling like rain in a bucket. Outside, the lattice of ships held. The Her dreadnought's hull was still, gorgeous, and terrible in its ruin. Some Kalinar warforms dimmed their banners in shame. Others held them bright with stubborn fear. In the Rook, Terran had his head in his hands, breathing like someone who'd run through winter air. The HFY scribe placed one wet hand against the screen and whispered, "Birth, birth, let this be birth." Mara set her palms on the table. The plates of the room leaned closer. The window tuned its light to the color of dawn. She let the gate see another truth. Not the war had been told too much. Not humanity's old songs, the gate would find those in time. She told it about the moment in a market on a rock no one would remember, when a stranger had pressed an orange into her mother's hand and said, "Take, your daughter was watching, let her see generosity." The orange had been small and mainline grown and knobby from a harsh season. It tasted like a sun she would not see for another decade. It tasted like the hinge on which a life turns. The gate answered with a pulse that tasted like snow, like the first time a drought child puts out a tongue and catches a flake and understands that cold can be gentle. It offered her that. It could offer snow to worlds that had never known it. It could offer the physics of snow, the patience of it, the way it rests on every edge and waits for hands to shape it into a person and then melt back gracefully. It could offer soft. She laughed, sharp as breaking glass, and then her laugh softened. "All right, let's begin." They began. It was not spectacular in the way war is spectacular. It was spectacular in the way a seed is spectacular. They traded not secrets but human needs and gate cares. The gate learned the way humans measure trust, task by task, breath by breath, not by treaty, but by showing up in a snowstorm with warm bread. Humans learned the way the gate felt friendship, the balanced hum of a million plates as a rhythm, like the steady hand on a fuse that would save someone's life if you never let it go slack. Mara felt a problem she had carried for years: ease. The problem of not knowing how to talk to old things without making them into pedestals or enemies. You talk as you would to a river you love. Ears first, then feet in the water, then a silent nod which says, "I will carry your stones with respect." Information, yes, began to carriers through the aperture. Principles for tuning matter into kindness. Algorithms not for weaponry but for resilience. Maps of places in the old builder's cosmos where home could be made gentler by a degree. The gate would not carry armies. It would carry nurses to remote outposts faster than despair could arrive. It would not ferry warheads. It would ferry libraries bound in light and voice and weight. It would not move empires. It would move soup kitchens to the mouth of a storm. And a price. There was always one, not a tithe, a responsibility. Those who walked the gate would carry their stories not as banners but as duties. They would tell the truth about what they did with the gifts. They would not hide and hoard because the gate stripped hoarding of its elegance and left it in the light where its greed was ugly. The gate would refuse those who could not bear that light. Humans would be refused if they failed kindness. Mara nodded. This was expected. This was desired. She had asked for this. She remembered nights on the Rook when a new crewman asked, "How do you sleep after you've seen what we've seen?" And she had said, "With windows open." Sometimes the cold saved you. It kept you honest. A tremor ran through the plates. A request, small and embarrassed, like when a child finally asks for water though it has been thirsty all afternoon. The gate wanted something too. It wanted not to be left alone. Old long-lived things have patience, but they also have loneliness that runs like a crack through a glacier. The builders had left. The gate had watched 1,000 civilizations come and pose and preen and demand, and it had pretended not to mind. Now it asked shyly for company, not visitors. Friends, like a ship's crew, quirky, irritating loud with bad jokes and good hands and the habit of singing in hallways at odd hours. Mara closed her eyes. "We are very good at singing at odd hours," she said. "We are very bad at leaving people alone when they shouldn't be." The plates thrummed a small pleased vibration. The treaties outside would have to be rewritten. The galaxy would rage and praise. The streams would carry arguments as if they were pearls. There would be court cases. There would be elections. There would be all the mess that comes when something new and needed cracks the shell of how things are. None of it could be managed from this room. None of it mattered in this room. It would matter, but later. Mara asked the gate, this friend, one more thing. "There are others like you." The window shivered. A map sketched itself, not in places as much as in possibility. The galaxy was a winter night sky with breath rising from 1,000 small chimneys. Yes, gates existed. They were quiet. Some were broken. Some were asleep. Some had been hurt so deeply they had forgotten they were ever doors. This one could sing to them. It could remind, not command, invite. They would answer in time. Mara stood. She walked back along the singing stair. The rail brushed her fingers as it parted, a cat again, unwilling to say farewell, saying "see you soon." At the threshold she paused and looked back. She could see why people built cathedrals, not for God, but for a place big enough to hold the feeling of gratitude without wasting it. "We'll bring bread," she said, "and stories." She passed through the light. The observation pane was full of faces, human and not. The ship's bridge smelled of ozone and breath and someone's old coffee. Terran cried openly now, salt on his cheek tattoos making new silver lines. The HFY scribe let a droplet fall, the purest of its waters. Even a Kalinar warform had shifted its banners to scarlet, a language for apology. The lattice of ships held as gentler craft moved to rescue survivors from the herd dreadnought, whose last song turned to a humming in the bones of every listening soul. "We chose to protect. Let that be remembered. Build." The dreadnought's chieftain's voice came, cracked with smoke. "Birth," they said again. "Birth, birth." Mara spoke simply into the bridge. "It's lonely," she said, "and it's kind. We will not take, we will not own, we will accompany." The word fell like bread into an empty hand, accompany. It is not a word that makes history books thrill. It makes kitchens and clinics and midnight vigils. It makes someone get up off a cold stoop and go back inside to sit with you till dawn. That is how history actually survives. The galaxy had always been hungrier for a spectacle than it admitted. It always wanted the clean arc, the sword raised, the hero silhouetted, the enemy routed. Now, too, it wanted that arc. It wanted to decide whether humanity had conquered an old thing and wrested it into use. If so, the responses were easy: praise or condemnation, war or alliance. A company does not give easy responses. It asks you to put down the instrument you use to measure, win, and pick up your hands instead. Before the commentary machines could shred the moment into tinsel, Mara turned public transmission down. This was heart work, not stadium work. She opened a channel, private and wide. It would only be heard by ships with their windows open. She spoke to those kinds of ships. "There will be relief routes," she said. "Not of metal and fuel only, of stories. The gate wants our truths as much as our traffic. If you have songs about how your people survive a winter, bring them. If you have ways to teach a child to sit with boredom without breaking something, bring that. If you know how to forgive, bring instructions step by step. If you have a recipe for a soup you make when the power fails, bring that. We can move clinics, we can move teachers, we can move soft, and we can carry the duty of telling the truth about what we did with it." A hush. Then a HFY voice, bright as morning through rain. "We have lullabies," it said simply. "Thousands." An archer choir whisper. "We have nets that catch despair before it falls into habit." A Kalinar banner humbled wrote. "We have theorems that make brittle things flex." From a small human courier far out beyond the reliable trade routes, a crackled voice. "We have a deck of cards with the corners worn off, and we play quietly with the lights low so the babies sleep." "Bring it all," Mara said, and despite herself she smiled, suddenly younger, suddenly exactly the age of the human ship she had been at 10. The gate hummed behind her, pleased. Its plates told her quietly that it would not always glow for her only. That would be wrong. It would glow for those who came with the right hand and the right stories and the right willingness to be seen. Humans would help it tell the difference. Others would teach humans how to keep their hands right when pride strained the wrist. On the live feeds that inevitably spun up later, the debate never ceased. It never would. Some said the gate had chosen humanity, that this proved old hierarchical fantasies. Some said humans had hacked it. Some said a trick. They hurled words like stones that turned to moths in the light and fluttered off. Meanwhile, in the fold of the gate's shadow, bread was baked. Meanwhile, a child with an oxygen deficiency was ferried with her mother from a failing dome to a clean wing full of new snow the child could sit in, laughing with the unself-conscious ease of someone whose lungs had just learned the word enough. Meanwhile, a librarian stepped through the gate with an armful of books bound in light that shifted the way ideas do when they land in a place prepared for them. Meanwhile, two enemies stood in the same aperture and saw the same dawn the gate painted for anyone who let their eyes be gentle. Meanwhile, the Her chieftain was buried with honors in a garden where the dirt was new, and they decorated the grave not with weapons, but with an unfinished puzzle, to show the work goes on. Mara stayed for weeks. Time told differently in the gate's presence. She ate at odd hours with anyone who came, with hands she didn't always know. She learned to hear the gate's moods, the way the wind pitched higher when someone lied by habit, the way the plates hummed low when a story told well lifted a room. Sometimes she woke from a short sleep and felt the tug of a memory the gate had left at her bedside like a glass of water, and she would drink it and feel stronger. Work began, the kind that is unphotogenic and decisive. Engineers stood with poets and argued about the definition of home. Pilots sat with philosophers and learned the flight paths of ethics. Teens skated on the plates when no one stopped them, which the gate enjoyed because it liked the way their laughter sounded like ancient waterfalls. The Kalinar built a memorial for the Her dreadnought in numbers, a curve that described sacrifice without reducing it. The Kashai named the aperture drift a river birth. The Archer choir retuned some of the plates to catch despair and let it down easy. Through it all, the gate refused armies. Even when someone thought they had found an innocent way to call an army something else, a protective assemblage, a preventative mass, a chorus by other means, the gate hummed mildly and failed to bloom for them. Its refusal taught the galaxy a patience that would change more than the Senate of the Silent Accord or 1,000 governors' edicts. It changed the habit of the hand that reaches for a club before it reaches for a sponge. There were those who would not learn. There always are. A slick empire at the galaxy's edge tried to smuggle tactical cores through, disguised as medical storage. The gate felt the cores hiding their sharpness the way a grandmother feels the razor in a cake. It cooled. It unfurled the softest snow over the shipment so it could be seen from every angle. The snow did not melt for days. The couriers stood red-faced in the light while the galaxy watched them shiver, and in the end they left the cores on the floor and took tea under the protection of a quiet Kashai who had been a nurse in 4 wars and had patience like a seam. Not all resistance was cartoon villainy. Many asked honest questions that had teeth. What if there is a plague we can only stop with force? What if a tyrant refuses to stop and the gate would not carry soldiers? What if the gate's decisions reflect a bias we cannot see? Mara answered those she could with humility, and the gate answered in its way, by offering a different style of mathematics. It did not try to solve every problem directly. It provided the means to alter the shape of around the problem, so that plague vectors shorted to harmlessness, so that tyrants found their crowds dwindled not by fear, but by boredom as power stopped behaving like a spectacle, so that bias was revealed by the shape of where the plates hummed sour and then could be tuned by many hands. There were failures. Of course there were. There was a hospital that refused to treat a kind of person. The gate carried light there, not supplies. The light never turned off for a week. Everyone was so tired of being seen they could not go on as they had. They changed. It was slow. It was imperfect. It held. There were grifters who came to tell stories they thought the gate wanted and were bored because the gate preferred stories that admitted to bad days. They left to find better battles. Let them. The work was heavy, and there is no shame in excusing yourself from a table you cannot carry. Shame enters when you throw stones at the ones who are carrying. Humanity did not become saints. Humanity failed and apologized and made stew. It surprised the old neighbors. They had expected the new power to surge with pride, to insist that the gate had chosen them, that they had a destiny. They had expected banners. A few banners did go up, and they were sewn into quilts by elderly humans who laughed so hard their sides hurt. In the end, the quilts were used in clinics in the gate's shadow, to keep children warm after surgeries that could happen now because the gate could carry a certain kind of light that made certain kinds of cells behave like they had remembered their first intention. The day came when the gate sang to its siblings. It began as a long rise in the wind tone, then a ripple through the plates that looked like a bright hand pressed to skin. The hum ran outward. No one could measure how far. Some said it went to the edge of the galaxy. Some said it folded and opened and braided, and the question was wrong. What mattered was that here and there, quietly, other gates opened their eyes. On a rock with more magma than dust, an aperture sighed and let a tired miner walk into a field of starlight and cry knots out of her shoulders. In a ruin where an empire had once tried to force a door, a gate relearned the word friend. Near the white collapse of a star that had eaten its planets and would spend 1 billion years apologizing with light, a gate blinked and sang one note that a human far away felt in his knees, and then went on with his groceries with a smile he did not understand. Mara was not there for all of it. No one could be. She was there for bread on a steel table, and the first time a snowflake melted on a child's tongue who had only known dust and who said, with a seriousness beyond age, "There is gentle in the world." She was there for the apology of a Kalinar warform that had cycled up in fear, and how it learned to cycle down and sit in the gate's light like a mountain that had put off its pride and was glad to be only rock. She was there for the naming of a library not after a general, but after the Her Dreadnought's final song. At night, when there was such a thing as night in the gate's precinct, she sat with Terran on the observation deck where it was quiet and long. He'd stopped crying days ago. He was tired in a new way, not the grim tired of holding back catastrophe, but the deep tired of having worked a long day for something that would not break. He traced the ghost-like tattoos on his wrist and said, "Cap, why us?" Mara thought about saying rhetoric. She chose truth. "Because we showed up without enough," she said. "We didn't pretend we were full when we were hungry. We told the gate our lack and our will, because we didn't take a picture and leave, because we are not above mending." He nodded, head tilted toward the glowing aperture. After a long time, he said, "Do you ever get afraid that this will make us soft, all this kindness?" "No," she said, and her voice surprised her with the iron in it. "Kindness is a hard skill. It's harder than cruelty. Anyone can break. Can you hold? Can you show up when it's boring and embarrassing and not glorious and there's no song? That's the hard work. We're good at hard work." He laughed, and sunshine moved across a table inside someone's small kitchen 1,000 light years away, and a grandmother smiled for no reason anyone could name. The gate called Mara one morning with a minor errand that was not minor. "There is a village." It told her by pitch and thrumming plates, and the window showed a cluster of weather-beaten domes on a hard plain. "They think they have nothing to give. They have a way of mending boots that turns leather into a friend. I want that way." Mara went. It took time, real dusty time, to eat with them and be looked at sideways and then to be taught. She came back with her hands smelling of leather and oil and honest glue. She pressed them to the gate's rail. The gate sighed like a creature that had been scratched where it could never reach. There was a tragedy they could not dodge. A fire in the gates under plates, not lit by malice, but by a missung tune in the physics of a new stew of elements the archer choir had been testing. The fire ran wrong and took wrongness with it. 3 good people were lost. The gate cooled itself so swiftly every surface frosted, and the frost made everything look like a memorial and was for a day. The grief was hard and ordinary and clean. No one tried to make it profound. It was heavy, we carried it. The gate sang a low song that did not insist on meaning, it only insisted on presence. The song stayed for the rest of the season, and some ships detuned their engines to match it so they would hum in sympathy as they passed. Mara returned at last to the small room with the table and 2 chairs. The gate had altered it, an extra chair. Without fuss, it had made room for a friend who might come with her next time. On the table lay a small object, not an object, a memory pressed into a shape. The first orange she had ever held. It glowed slightly, not with light, but with the exact feeling of surprise and goodness that had reinvented her when she was small. She held it in her palm, and it warmed without growing sticky. She did not know if she should eat it. She did what humans do when they do not know the etiquette of a gift. She simply held it. That was enough. A relay pinged, 1 of 1,000. A fleet on the edge of charted space had encountered something old and dangerous and loud. It was a thing that ate radio. It could not be cut. It could not be burned. It had not been made with malice, but its shape was mischief. They wanted to send a force. The gate tuned, shook its apertures once, and opened to a room full of librarians. It sent them, along with a HFY nurse and a Kalinar with kind banners, and a Her mechanic with strong hands, and a child who knew how to be bored without breaking something. They sat with the thing and read to it until it fell asleep. The galaxy argued about whether this could be real. The thing slept. It had not been unmarred. It had been companioned. It would need reading again. We wrote a schedule. The story would be told and mistold eventually. Some would write that the gate had chosen Mara because she was brave and pure. She would laugh at that the rest of her life in small private rooms where truth was allowed. She had been tired and ordinary. She had held out her hand and refused to pretend she was not afraid. She had carried without spectacle. That had been enough to be the first. Others would come whose hands were cooler and wiser. The gate would hum for them too. On the day she finally took a shuttle down to the ash-gray planet, the one the gate had orbited without descending, she walked on a ground that had seen too much less gentle history. The ash caked under her boots. The wind was thin with old chemical ghosts. She bent and set a small plaque. It had no flag. It bore 3 words in common and 20 in the languages of those who had stood in the lattice and refused to let the spears through. It read, "We held together." She did not expect ceremony. She was embarrassed by it when it came. HFY water bells and Kalinar banners slack in a posture of deep respect, and the archer choir whispering in a minor key that made your eyelashes feel like birds. The Rook's crew cheered in the ragged way crews cheer when their throats ache. Terran kissed the plaque as if it were a baby's forehead and jumped backward laughing because his lips came away gray. "That's going to stay on my mouth all day," he complained. "Good," Mara said. "Let it remind you what dust tastes like. We'll be asked to forget. And if we do, we won't," she said. "You sound certain." "Not of us," she said. "Of the gate, it'll scold us." He looked up at the aperture glowing like a morning caught in a ring of stone. "I think I can live with that." The day folded into the steady kind of busy that makes a life. The gate learned the names of the dock hands. It learned the times bread came out of the ovens in the repair bay. It learned Terran's whistle and would answer it with a pitch that made him grin and scold his implants to stop translating. It learned that it liked the color yellow when it was on rubber gloves and did not like it much on warning signs. It learned the joke about the engineer and the poet, and it laughed each time as if it had never heard it. It also learned loss. Mara's grandmother would have liked that. Kindness that cannot endure grief, she had said once, is only politeness. The gate was learning to be impolite to despair. It flicked the ends of despair's sleeves and made it laugh in spite of itself. It refused many more. It refused them gently. Some massacres were averted because of that refusal. Some wars found themselves robbed of spectacle and thus of momentum. Some old heroes went quietly home and learned to bake. Some young fools went loudly into new work that was finally worthy of them. Across the rim, a human boy in a domed town watched the broadcasts and painted the gate in oils, bright and wrong and true. He brought the painting to school, and his teacher cried because she had needed to see the aperture through a child's mistakes. The painting made its way to a station where someone hung it near the rails the way humans hang art in places where everyone rushes, insisting that beauty be encountered by accident. On a planet of dust, a woman who had been a soldier for too many seasons took off her armor and learned to mend boots. She sent a pair to the gate. She said nothing. The leather had learned to be a friend. The gate hummed a note to the boots that those who listened very closely said sounded like "Please come again." When it rained on a world that had never known rain, a HFY child put out a tongue in imitation of a human video and caught a drop. The child announced solemnly, "It tastes like patient days," and all the adults nodded because that was correct. The gate's siblings began to write back. The messages were slow and old and in languages that had never known mouths. They arrived in the bones. They arrived in the slosh of water in cups. They arrived in the way shadows moved across rooms. They said cautiously, "We have been asleep." They said, "We see your bread." They said, "We are afraid." The first gate replied with a chorus of lullabies collected in the weeks since it had opened, and the voices of 1,000 species learning how to sing to each other without embarrassment. It added the sound of boots repaired carefully walking across a floor toward a friend. It added the taste of an orange. Mara dreamt on a rare dark night that the first builders returned. They were not human in the dream. They were not anything she knew. They were the shape of hands, perhaps. They were tired. The gate pulsed with embarrassment like a child who has broken a vase and expects scolding. The builders touched the gate the way her grandmother had touched her cheek when she had spilled water from the pail. Sadness, yes, but then a smile. "You did good," the builders said in the language of rain. "You chose refusal when refusal was love, and then you chose a friend." The gate shivered with happiness so profound that in the waking world, 1,000 small lights flickered along its inner ring for no measurable reason anyone could find, and two lovers, far from answers, said yes to each other without quite knowing why. The future would be messy. It always is. Some gates would take centuries. Some would never open, and that would have to be accepted like a scar you do not pick. Some species would decide that this style of giving was a trap. They would turn away and find other paths. Some would return quietly decades later with a loaf under one arm and humility under the other. Some would die before they heard the gate's lullabies, and their names would be written into the light anyhow by those who remembered. Mara would grow old, not old. She would refuse to do that. She would grow right-old, which is different. She would step a little slower and smile a little faster. The gate would learn to tease her gently about her knees. She would tease it about its habit of misleading birds. When she finally stepped into the plates one day with pain like a hand on her shoulder that said, "We're done, we're done," the gate would hum a low note and carry her gently into a room where there is a table and 2 chairs and an orange that glows only a little. She would put her head down on the table for a while. When she lifted it, she would be neither hungry nor tired. That would be enough. In the meantime, she remained in the small living now that defines our greatness more than the big stories ever do. A man came with a crate of potatoes and a complaint and left with a new song. A child arrived with a question so big it made the plates curious, and the answer was a small dog. A starving station learned how to make bread with a fungus that liked to be told jokes. The gate learned how to swear, but only in ways that would not embarrass grandmothers. A student put a prosthetic on a bird and taught it to fly again. A planet turned its war monument into a clinic with the same address so no one would have to change their mail. When the Kalinar finally stood in full council and bowed their banners to the gate, there was no triumph. There was only a simple vow, written in numbers and read aloud by a human boy with paint-stained fingers who had been chosen to speak because he had the best smile. "We will measure courage by repair," said. "We will calculate victory by who got fed." The galaxy, which had always loved stories where someone arrives and claims a sword, resisted for a while. Then it began to crave this other story, the one where someone arrives and brings a spoon. It is a strange pivot culturally. It takes time to love spoons, but the gate refuses to hurry anyone. It is older than impatience. And so it was that, centuries from that first morning when historians told the tale, they could not find the precise angle from which to take the classic heroic portrait of Mara. She had no plinth. She had no sword. She had a tired open hand held near a rail that curved to meet her palm like a cat that wanted to be touched. The best they could do was tell the truth. She stepped forward when others had stepped to demand. She showed a kind of endurance that asked for company. She carried quieter than was fashionable. She left the door open behind her and never once tried to own the house. The gate was not a throne. It was a stoop. We sat there, and when cold came, we brought blankets, and when dawn came, we brought coffee, and when grief came, we made a circle of chairs. Sometimes, from deep within the gate, an old lullaby would drift, sung in a language no one remembered, and the child who had tasted snow would fall back asleep, and the adults would look at each other across the steam of their cups and remember why any of it matters. Headphone, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps keep humanity's stories alive among the stars. Sometime after the first rush, when the work had settled into habit, Mara made a practice of walking the long ring at the gate's shadow each dawn. The crews teased her. Captain's Promenade, they called it. She called it listening. The gate liked to rustle its plates during those walks. It told her gossip. It told her the archer choir had invented a blanket that sang you to sleep if you pretended to be a stone. It told her the Kashai had discovered a way to make tea out of fog. It told her Terran was in love, and she laughed and said she knew, and the gate pretended to be surprised like a friend who wants to be told things it already knows so it can be properly delighted. On one of those mornings, a ship came in with a broken heart, not the engine, the captain. She was small as a glass burned brown by suns, and she kept touching her pockets like she had lost something that had lived there for a long time and now did not. The gate tuned itself down, plates hum low, window light soft. It knew grief as an instrument knows a key. Mara walked beside the woman, silent, until the woman said, "I kept him alive too long." Mara did not say the easy thing. She said, "Tell me how." The woman told. She told the hands on the chest, the rhythm, the light, the promises. She told how solar storms sing, how monitors lie, how hope steals sleep and gives it back ruined. She told the hospital smell that you could not scrub off. She told about the last breath and the mistake of thinking you were holding it for him when you were not. She told about the bag with his clothes and the weight of it and the way his shoes looked like they could stand up without him. She told about the silence afterward, which was not quiet at all but full of wild animals. Mara's grandmother would have approved. When someone is breaking, she had said once, do not hand them glue, sit with them until it stops raining. Mara sat. The gate hummed like rain. The plates shivered underfoot like a dog who wants to help and understands it cannot and chooses instead to lean. At the end, the gate opened a little. A small thin of light, and let the woman step into a room with a chair and a window and music that had no melody and every melody. She came out later with a cup of tea and the particular cleanliness around the eyes of someone who has given up an argument with a god and is glad to finally be allowed to sleep. She slept. She woke. She made soup for someone else the next day. The gods watch that if they are any use at all. That afternoon, a storm rolled through the ring, real lightning, leashed by the gate into a spectacle safe enough to stand under and wild enough to remind everyone how small you are. Children screamed with delight and counted. HFY lifted their edges into the blue crackle and let themselves be filled with light until they glowed like living lanterns. Kalinar wrote the storm into banners that looked like frozen rain you could walk into without getting wet. Humans stood with their faces upturned. Some cried because they had not done that since they were small enough to be carried. Under the noise, the gate hummed a counterpoint that made the hair on Mara's arms rise. "We are alive," it sang. "We are alive, we are alive." Messages came from gates far away. Some were fractious. One gate called the first gate sentimental. The first gate hummed, "Yes." Another gate said it did not like children, and the first gate sent recordings of a dozen toddlers laughing at chickens, and the second gate said very softly after a pause, "Perhaps a few children." There was a gate that hated snow because it had been built near a white world where snow meant hunger. The first gate sent it rain instead. They exchanged weather like letters between old friends who have never met. A rumor persisted that a gate out near the coal-black halo of a dead cluster had become a tyrant. Gates do not become tyrants, but rumors are like storms in human rooms. They need to be walked through. Mara took a small team across, one HFY with deep patience, one her with big shoulders, one Kalinar with banners that knew how to bow, one human whose job it was to tell jokes at funerals. They found not a tyrant, but a gate that had closed itself so long it had forgotten how to open without fear. "It hurts," it sang in a voice full of broken plates. "Everything gets in." They sang back, off-key and stubborn, until the plates remembered another word, "through." They stayed 3 months and changed nothing. The gate opened itself 3 centimeters. That was enough. Later, it would open for a child with muddy shoes and a story about a frog. Work never looks like you think it will. Years slipped like beads on a string. The gate remained as new as the first morning and as old as a sound we would find in the bones of creatures that would come after us. The galaxy kept arguing. It will always argue. That is good. Arguing is to cultures as kneading is to bread. Pride took its swings. Fear threw its stones. The stones turned to moths and fluttered off and made small children giggle and reach out their hands to catch them, on a day that was neither special nor empty. The kind that holds a hinge we will only recognize later. A group of young humans walked the long ring with Mara, who had lines now that told the kind of joke sleeping does. They were cocky. They had earned some of that. They wanted to know if all this was a story that would break under pressure. They wanted to know if kindness was a luxury. They wanted to know if endurance was a word we used because we were afraid to say fight. Mara stopped under a segment where the plates sang bright if you tapped them with your knuckles. She tapped. The sound ran ahead and came back with friends. "You think endurance is passive?" she asked, not unkindly. "Try holding a hand through a night of fever without flinching. Try standing between a spear and a nurse without a weapon because the weapon would make the nurse's work impossible. Try being seen. Try the discipline of not lying when it would make you look good. Try the grind of unglamorous repair. You want fight. This is a fight against giving up." One of them, eyes like backlit leaves, mouth like trouble, said, "What if the gate leaves us? What if it decides it like the builders better? What if it closes?" Mara looked up at the inner curve of the aperture, at the dust like the breath of ghosts, at the light that had become a color we did not have a word for because it was made of trust and mourning. "Then we carry on," she said. "We were doing this before we had the gate. We were doing this when the hulls creaked and the winter came early and the idiots were selling hope on the cheap. The gate chose us because we were already the kind of people who would do this without it. We do not hold because there is a prize. We hold because this is who we are when we are worthy of our dead. They were quiet. The gate hummed, low and proud. That night, someone put a record on in the mess. A very old human album with scratches and warmth. The song was about a place with no precise coordinates, and it made people stand and slow dance the way soldiers do when there is finally a safe floor. The gate turned its wind down so as not to be rude. HFY borrowed a human coat and wore it draped like a river. Kalinar wrote the word home in an equation that made the lights dim to a perfect shade of dusk. Terran came to stand by Mara. He'd stopped being a boy years ago and had become the kind of man whose steadiness changed other people's sedans. He held a cup. He bumped his shoulder into hers. "We did something," he said. "We did the ordinary thing," she said, "and it turned out to be the revolution." He sipped. "If I write that in my log, they'll think I'm being poetic." "You are," she said. "Be useful about it." They laughed softly. The laughter rose to the aperture and hung there like a promise made of breath. The last image in the public archive of that year is not dramatic. Cameras caught Mara sitting on the stoop of the gate, the little ledge where the plates meet the ring and catch the day. She is holding a half-eaten slice of bread. She is not looking at the camera. She is watching a small child fall, and has her hand half raised not to catch the child, but to let the child catch themselves while knowing someone cares if they do. The child in the image is grinning. The gate in the image is glowing as if it has decided that endurance is a kind of light. No statue was erected. Someone suggested it. The suggestion was folded into a paper boat and set on the river berth the HFY had named, and the gate made a current that took it away to a place where small suggestions live comfortable lives and do no harm. What was erected instead was a community kitchen and a listening post and a repair bay with good lighting and a rule painted above the door that said simply, "Keep the windows open." The war had ended 1,000 years ago. The story began. The work had only just begun. The story continues. It will continue after us. If we are lucky, our grandchildren will tell it like a bedtime song. If we are very lucky, they will grow bored in the middle and sleep before the ending, and we will carry them to bed smiling. Because boredom is a privilege earned by those who repaired the world sufficiently that a night can be quiet without being false. One morning, a meteor shower tore the sky above the ash-gray planet into sparkling threads. Children squealed and lovers went quiet and telemeters pinged for fun. Mara stood in her old coat. The gate hummed, an old thing purring. Terran stood beside her, and the HFY scribe and a Kalinar who had become her friend in the benign way mountains become friends when you learn the paths. They watched light fall. No weapon hid in it. No plot twisted. The light fell, spent itself, became dust that would one day be bread. Mara closed her eyes. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.